So the other good news this week is, President Trump. I always quote myself here, but I've often observed, let's put it this way, that the best immigration reform would be actually to enforce the law. And President Trump was facing this asylum crisis where people were flooding the borders, trying to break our system with the support of the leftist agitators that are now trying to take down our system in our nation's cities, with fraudulent asylum claims, where you're getting, exponentially greater asylum claims, most of whom tend to be meritless. And the problem is, you grant the asylum claim, or you say there's a reasonable fear, and they get a hearing, and they never show up for the hearing. So they more aggressively enforce the law, which is to quickly adjudicate those asylum requests initially, and send them back home. Remove them from the country immediately if they were found not to have a credible fear. So what did the left do? Well, they've come up with this idea that the habeas corpus, the great writ as it's called, applies to illegal aliens trying to enter the United States of America. And the habeas corpus rule, those of you who aren't familiar with it, essentially requires the government to justify the detention of a citizen or a person. It goes back before the founding of the country. We inherit habeas corpus from the English common law that was present when the country was founded. Magna Carta. It's a glorious, glorious development in human freedom against the king, or government generally now. So how does it work that you have a habeas corpus right to not be sent home? Well, 7 justices, 7. So that meant 2 liberals, Justices Breyer and I believe Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, agreed with the 5 conservatives on this issue that the habeas corpus is not appropriate to apply to aliens seeking asylum, and that Congress has given the authority to do this. That Congress has created this law that allows the president the discretion to enforce the law as he's been enforcing it. And as a result, we've kind of gotten the border a little bit more under control. I don't want to underestimate the security of the border, but that crisis is largely abated in terms of the asylum crisis, because people are being either having to ask for the asylum outside the United States, which is another issue, or if they make it across the border and it's obviously they don't have an asylum claim, like the person who was complaining, whose case was being brought before the court. I think he was from Sri Lanka. He had been kidnapped and beaten up. He couldn't tell who did it, why they did it, or if the government was responsible for it. So the hearing officer, the officer making the initial determination said, nope. And the left was trying to create a constitutional right to have those claims adjudicated beyond that initial determination and allow that person to stay here practically forever. It would have led to open borders, more so than they already are, believe it or not. So that was a big victory for the rule of law. And it's remarkable what happens in terms of controlling the immigration crisis or mitigating it when an administration is committed to enforcing the law. And that's what Judicial Watch has been trying to do, which is to get the government to enforce the rule of law on immigration. I mean, that will solve our immigration problem. Enforce the law. Illegal aliens are not supposed to be here. They can be deported. We should deport them where the law allows. Local and state authorities who aid and abet illegal aliens, I would argue, when they directly do so, they should be subject to prosecution. Barring that, the law shouldn't allow them to even think about doing it. Of course, the law already does prohibit it. And if we had the local police, as opposed to helping in terms of the enforcement of our nation's immigration laws, we wouldn't have an illegal immigration problem. Because right now, you get across the border, and you get here illegally, or you overstay your visa, as many do, and you reside here illegally, criminally. There's virtually zero chance you'll be caught and deported. Zero chance. And when I say zero, I'm only slightly exaggerating. But if you were able to expand our resources to help have the police be able to inquire, but which they're not able to under the sanctuary policies that are controlling most of our city police departments, how about that for police reform? We let the police help us enforce the rule of law on citizenship. Maybe Congress can pass that rather than the harassing, hampering laws they're trying to pass in response to the insurrection, as opposed to confronting it, they're enabling it further. That's, I guess, another matter. And Judicial Watch has litigation against San Francisco and Santa Clara County. Santa Clara is just south of San Francisco, San Jose area, over their sanctuary policies. And we've sued in California and Maryland. And we had news coming out of Maryland. We had sued in California and Maryland, over their decisions to provide cash benefits to illegal aliens using the coronavirus as an excuse without the permission of the state legislature, which is a violation of law. And taxpayers have a right to challenge that. Well, we just had the court who agreed with us initially that, yeah, it's likely they violated the law, and yeah, it's likely taxpayers were harmed by it. He said, well, taxpayers don't have the right to enforce the law. Just overturned 100 years of Maryland state law and taxpayer standing. So we're repealing that, obviously. But so the Supreme Court had, the point being that Judicial Watch is fighting, and has been for some time, to enforce the rule of law on immigration. And we applaud the Trump administration's decisions to more strictly enforce the law at the borders to address the crisis. We need a secure border. If we want a republic, we need to have a secure border. If you don't want a republic, open the borders. If you don't want a country, open the borders. But until then, we just have to have a border, and it has to be enforced. And thankfully, the Supreme Court upheld that principle, at least indirectly, this week. And I encourage you again to go and read it. Read Justice Alito's decision. Read Justice Thomas's concurrent decision. I encourage you to read Justice Thomas's decision, his concurrent opinion, because he goes through quite thoroughly the history of the Magna Carta. The history of the habeas corpus, the Great Writ. And it's just fascinating reading. So if you love your rights, if you love your freedom, if you love our individual rights that have been, we've been able to achieve through our Western civilization, you're going to want to read that decision. You're going to want to read that decision. Although I have to say, I was reading that decision, I was reminded of the fact that the Supreme Court had granted essentially habeas corpus rights to terrorists caught overseas and kept overseas, which is a wild abuse of power. That was a 5-4 decision, just like this one was a 5-4 decision going the other way. They didn't want to address and overturn that earlier decision, but I guess that will be for another day. So, the Supreme Court will be issuing other decisions, one, I believe, on abortion soon, the other on President Trump's taxes. Again, the coup cabal trying to break his civil rights by requiring him to turn over his taxes, and so they can do fishing expeditions against him. Complete abuses of power. So we'll see how the courts handle that as well. So a lot coming up from the Supreme Court soon.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all the latest news from Judicial Watch.